The dining room looked cold and perfect, almost like no one really lived there. The marble floors were polished until they shined, and the glass table was so long it felt endless. Silver dishes were set neatly on top, some of them still carrying. The tags from the store had flown in that same morning after getting Mallory's last-minute text. "You're still coming? Dorian will expect you." The message, like always, meant my presence wasn't exactly wanted, but my absence would be noticed. I still came. I brought a bottle of Bram's 1978 Burgundy, the one he once said we'd open for Dorian's big milestone. I wrapped it in linen and slipped a small handwritten note under the label. I wasn't hoping for a big reaction, just a simple acknowledgement. Mallory walked in wearing a deep red dress and glittering diamonds. She gave a toast with the confidence of someone who believed every eye in the room was on her. She praised Dorian's new business deal, his leadership, his discipline. Then, with a quick flick of her hand, she called him to speak. Dorian stood up, a glass of champagne in his hand. "Not the Burgundy I brought," he joked, his eyes scanning the table. He chuckled and said, "I'm grateful you're all here. But honestly, the best gift this year would be if Mom stopped hovering or maybe even left my life completely." The room burst into laughter. A few gasped, trying to cover it with chuckles. Even Mallory raised her glass in fake applause. I didn't react. I placed my fork gently beside the untouched steak, folded my napkin, and stood up. No dramatic exit. No tears, no gasps. Just me sliding the chair back, smoothing my skirt, and saying softly, "Thank you for dinner." Then I turned and walked out. No one followed. No one called my name. Back in the guest room, I packed my suitcase without bothering to fold anything. The Burgundy sat unopened on the counter. The only sound was the wheels of my suitcase bumping down each wooden stair as I carried it outside. The sea greeted me before I even stepped into my house. Not the romantic sound of waves, but the kind that sinks into your bones, cold, heavy, always threatening to rise higher. My house had always felt warm, even with its age, but that night the walls seemed to pull away from me, waiting to see if I had brought sorrow home again. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I hung up my coat, turned the heater up a little, and poured myself a cup of tea that had been sitting in the pot for 2 days. Then I went into the bedroom Bram and I once shared. I sat at the edge of the bed and slipped off my shoes with a long, quiet sigh. Reaching under the bed, I pressed my palm against the floorboard in the middle. The wood shifted slightly, just enough for me to slide my fingers under. I lifted it and pulled out a tan folder hidden there for years. That spot had once held anniversary gifts and emergency cash, but this folder had been waiting untouched since Bram and I first put it together when Dorian got engaged. The label still read, "Contingency Personal." I placed it on the bed and opened it slowly. Every page was as familiar as my own handwriting. The first sheet was the deed to my house, written in my name only. The next was the trust for Dorian's house funds I had transferred through my firm years ago. But the controlling interest had never been released to him. I had planned to hand it over when I turned 75, but 71 was old enough. I reread the clause about revocation rights. My initials beside Bram's signature, the lawyer's stamp still clear. Everything Dorian thought belonged to him didn't. I closed the folder and ran my hand over the cover. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel the need to shout. I only felt steady. I didn't need to explain myself. I just needed to act. I slipped the folder into my bag along with my checkbook and the maroon ledger Bram had always kept in his desk. It all began after Bram died. Dorian had called me with excitement about an idea app for restaurant scheduling. I didn't understand the tech, but I heard the passion in his voice. He needed money for development, and of course, I said yes. The second startup came 2 years later. That one never even launched. I covered the rent for his office, bought the website domain, and even paid off a partner who was threatening legal action when the business fell apart, when he got engaged. I offered to help with the down payment on the condo. I called it a head start. Quietly, I paid the full amount, but let him believe it was only part. He was proud, and I didn't want to take that away from him. I just wanted him to feel secure. Mallory was always polite, but never warm. After the wedding, she sent me a typed thank you card without even signing it. When she opened her boutique, she named it Mallory James Atelier. 2 weeks later, she came to me in a panic about expenses. I wrote her a check without asking any questions. They never said, "We need you." They said things like, "It would just be easier," or "We'll pay you back," or "We were hoping you could step in this once." But it was never just once. Over time, the calls grew shorter, sharper. Dorian no longer asked about my garden or sent vacation photos unless a receipt was attached. Mallory's voice was always cool, clipped, like they tolerated me instead of wanting me there. It wasn't about the money. I whispered to myself, running my fingers along the ledger. It was about the fact they expected me to always say yes, and I did for far too long. I opened the maroon ledger and looked at the last page. 27 personal transfers spread across 8 years. Not a single one had been repaid. I drew a straight line under the last entry. My first act of saying no didn't have to be loud. It only had to be final. The next morning, I sat in my lawyer's office. This place smelled like fresh paper and coffee. My attorney, Peter, was young but sharp. I handed him the folder without any explanation. I'd like to finalize the trust changes, effective immediately. And I want to transfer ownership of my house to the holding company, Elwyn Property Management. He blinked once, then nodded. He started scanning the documents. I had already filled out most of the forms. Old habits. He paused at one page. "You're removing Dorian as beneficiary." Yes, to no one. For now. It took less than an hour. He didn't ask questions after that, and I appreciated it. Before leaving, I handed him a sealed envelope labeled, "To be opened only upon my death." From there, everything moved quickly. I called an old realtor friend and asked her to quietly list the house but sell only to Lachlan. On paper, it looked like I was giving up, but I wasn't. Next, I went to the bank. I froze 2 accounts and redirected others into new holdings. The card Mallory used for her boutique expenses would stop working by morning. Finally, I sent Dorian a short text. "You said I should leave. I'm honoring your birthday wish." No forwarding address. I packed only what I needed. A few clothes, Bram's, watch, the ledger, the folder, and one photo of us at Cannon Beach. Before Dorian was born. I left behind the oak dining table where we once played cards, the wedding photo on the mantel, the quilt Bram's mother made. And I taped one envelope to the back of the pantry door. Unlabeled. The next morning. I signed a lease for a small furnished condo in Lincoln City under the name Cora Wynn. The keys felt cool in my hand. Meanwhile, at her boutique, Mallory's card declined twice. She laughed politely, blaming the machine, but when it failed again, her smile dropped. She tried her banking app. Access denied. By the time she got home, she was furious. "You need to call the bank," she snapped at Dorian, throwing the card on the counter. He shrugged, half listening, until he checked their mortgage portal. The last payment had bounced. Their joint account was locked. His face turned pale. That evening, they found the envelope in the mailbox. It had Dorian's name written in the same looping handwriting that once signed his school forms. Inside was a single sheet of cream paper. No greeting, no sign-off, just one sentence. "You asked me to disappear. I simply obeyed." Mallory scoffed. "She's being dramatic." Dorian didn't answer. Kay read the line again and again, holding the paper like it might change under his hands. She said, "She'll be back." Or begging for forgiveness. "You'll see." But deep down, Dorian knew she wouldn't, because everything he thought was his house, its accounts, even his company had. always been held together by threads I quietly spun. And now those threads were gone.